After watching people most of my life, I've learned something simple. Folks who have the least often give the most. Wealth can build a big house, but it takes something else entirely to make it home. I heard about a man who learned this truth the hard way, and the woman who taught him without even trying. The scratch marks on the daguerreotype still showed where his thumbnail had gouged her face. Daniel Carter stood in a house with 12 rooms and not a single voice to fill them. Dawn light crept through tall windows. The wedding portrait felt cold in his hands. 3 months since he'd clawed her image from the frame. He set the portrait face down on the mantel. The grandfather clock ticked loud enough to count his heartbeats. 40 come spring, gray threading his temples. 2,000 acres of prime grazing land. 800 head of cattle. A fortune most men would envy. And not one soul who'd miss him if he rode out and never came back. His father's old work shirt lay folded in a trunk by the door, patched at the elbows, faded at the collar. He'd kept it all these years without knowing why. Now he knew. If this story speaks to your heart, I'd be honored to hear where you're watching from today. And if you've been enjoying these stories, consider subscribing. Your support means more than you know. Dusty Creek smelled like horse manure and broken promises. Daniel rode in under a sun that pressed down like a hot iron. His father's shirt stuck to his back, salt stiff with 4 days of sweat. The main street stretched before him, a general store with a sagging porch, a blacksmith's forge belching smoke, a whitewashed church at the far end where folks gathered in their Sunday finest. He dismounted at the water trough. His mare drank deep while he watched the church social from across the street. Women in bustle dresses clustered around men in clean wool vests. Laughter carried on the dry wind. A fiddle player scratched out a waltz. Children chased each other between the tables while their mothers pretended not to notice the stranger in the patched shirt. A young widow caught his eye. Pretty. Perfumed, he could smell the rose water from 10 feet away. She smiled and something in his chest loosened. She walked toward him. Hips swaying, chin tilted just so. "You look like a man who's been riding a long time," she said. Her voice was honey and smoke. "Few days?" Passing through? Her eyes flicked down to his boots. Good leather. Hand-tooled. He'd forgotten to swap them out. Her gaze traveled back up the patched shirt, the frayed collar, the dust in his hair, the honey drained out of her voice. "I don't keep company with drifters." She turned and walked back to the church social without another word. Daniel watched her go. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. A tow-headed girl, maybe 5 years old, ran past chasing a hoop. Her rag doll tumbled from her arms into the mud. Daniel bent down, picked it up, wiped the worst of the dirt off with his bandana. "Here you go, little one." The girl reached for it with a gap-toothed smile. A hand clamped on her shoulder. "Sadie?" The mother's voice cut like a blade. She yanked the child back, her eyes raking over Daniel's clothes. "Don't take things from beggars. You don't know what you'll catch." She pulled her daughter away. The rag doll lay in the mud where Daniel had set it down. The little girl looked back over her shoulder. Daniel tipped his hat to her anyway. He mounted his horse and rode out of Dusty Creek before the fiddle finished its song. Miller's Crossing lay 2 days east. Maybe folks there would be different. But his boots, those fine, hand-tooled boots, caught the afternoon light as he rode. He should have thought to change them. Miller's Crossing proved no different. A shopkeeper's daughter with yellow ribbons in her hair, a smile that faded the moment Daniel admitted he couldn't afford the calico she was selling. The same calculation in her eyes. The same turning away. He stopped trying after that. The crossroads appeared on the 6th day, when his canteen ran dry and his mare started favoring her left foreleg. A squat adobe building sat where 2 wagon roads met, chimney smoke rising thin against the evening sky. Hand-painted sign nailed above the door, Rosa's Kitchen good food, fair price. Daniel's hands tightened on the reins. Another door. Another rejection waiting behind it. He almost rode past. But the smell of frying chilies caught the wind, and his stomach cramped so hard he bent forward in the saddle. 6 days of hardtack and jerky. 6 days of sleeping in haylofts and under mesquite trees. 6 days of watching people's faces close like shutters the moment they saw his clothes. He dismounted, tied his mare to the post, stood there for a long moment, staring at the door. The wood was warped from years of sun and rain. A tin coffee cup hung from a nail beside the handle for travelers who needed water, he reckoned. The cup was dented, but clean. He pushed the door open. Inside, the air hung thick with wood smoke and the sharp bite of roasting peppers. 3 rough-hewn tables filled the small room, covered with checkered oilcloth faded at the edges. A kerosene lantern hung from a beam overhead, flames steady behind soot-darkened glass. 2 cowboys sat at the far table. Plates scraped clean. Tin cups of coffee cooling in front of them. They looked up when Daniel walked in. Looked him over. Went back to their conversation. A woman emerged from the back room. She filled the doorway. Wide hips, soft arms. A body that took up space and made no apology for it. Her apron was white cotton, stained with honest work. Tied tight around her middle, dark hair pulled back from a round face, but eyes the color of good coffee. She looked at him. No pity, no disgust, no calculation. Just looking. "Seat yourself anywhere," she said. Her voice was low, unhurried. "Coffee's fresh." Daniel took the table nearest the door. Old habit, he liked to see who was coming in. The chair creaked under his weight. He pulled off his hat, set it on the table, ran his fingers through dust-stiff hair. The woman brought a blue enamelware coffee pot, dented from years of use, and poured without asking. Steam rose between them. The smell of it strong, bitter. Real made his eyes sting. "You want food?" "Just coffee, ma'am. I appreciate it." She nodded and walked back toward the kitchen. The 2 cowboys at the far table watched her go. One of them made a snorting sound pig-like, ugly. The other laughed. The woman didn't break stride, didn't flinch. Walked through the sound like it was nothing but wind. Daniel's jaw tightened. He reached into his pocket. His fingers found lint, a bent nail, nothing else. He'd spent his last coins 3 days back on oats for the mare. The woman returned with a plate, beans swimming in red sauce, a thick wedge of cornbread, butter melting into the cracks, a slice of salt pork, edges crisped brown. She set it in front of him. Daniel stared at the food. His stomach clenched. His throat worked. "Ma'am," the word came out rough as sandpaper. "I can't pay for this." She wiped her hands on her apron. shrugged. Did I ask? 3 words. They hit him somewhere behind his ribs. He couldn't remember the last time someone gave him something without wanting something back. The woman pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. Uninvited. Up close. He could see the lines at the corners of her eyes. Not from age, from squinting into the sun. From smiling. From years of hard work in a hard country. "You've been riding a while," she said. Not a question. 6 days. "Where you headed?" Daniel picked up the fork. His hand shook. He set it down again. "Don't rightly know." She nodded like that made perfect sense. "I'm Maria," she said. "Maria Lopez. My aunt owns this place. Rosa, she's getting on in years, so I run it mostly. Daniel." He didn't give his last name. Couldn't risk it. "Well, Daniel." Maria leaned back in her chair. "You eat that food before it gets cold. Cornbread ain't worth much once it goes stiff." He picked up the fork again. This time his hand stayed steady. The first bite of beans burned his tongue. But he didn't care. The second bite tasted like something he'd forgotten existed. The cowboys at the far table stood up, tossed coins on the oilcloth, headed for the door. One of them muttered something as he passed something about Maria. Something crude. She didn't react. Just watched them go with the patience of a woman who'd heard it all before. The door banged shut behind them. "My aunt's got a ranch about 2 miles south," Maria said, like nothing had happened. "Old barn out back. Ain't much, but it's dry. Got fresh hay in the corner." Daniel stopped chewing. "You're offering me a place to sleep." "I'm telling you where there's a dry barn with hay in it." She stood up, collected the cowboy's coins, dropped them in her apron pocket. "What you do with that information is your own business." She walked back to the kitchen. Daniel sat there with a fork full of beans halfway to his mouth. The kerosene lantern flickered. Outside, the evening wind picked up, rattling the tin cup against its nail. He finished the plate. Every bite. Scraped the cornbread through the last of the bean sauce. Drank the coffee down to the grounds. When Maria came back, he stood up. "Thank you." The words caught in his throat. He covered it with a cough. "I mean it." She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes. Not pity. Not charity. Something harder to name. 2 miles south, she said. "Follow the wagon ruts. You'll see the windmill." He put on his hat, walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the warped wood. "Ma'am, Maria. Maria." He turned back. "Why?" She tilted her head. The lantern light caught the curve of her cheek. "Why what?" "Why help a stranger you don't know from Adam?" She picked up his empty plate, carried it toward the kitchen, paused at the doorway. "Maybe because I know what it's like to be looked at and found wanting." She didn't turn around. "Maybe because my mama taught me better than to let a man go hungry when there's food on the stove." She disappeared into the back. Daniel stood there, hand still on the door. The evening air crept in through the gaps in the frame, cool against his sunburned face. 2 miles south, a dry barn, fresh hay, and a woman who looked at him like he was just a man, nothing more, nothing less. He stepped outside into the fading light. His mare nickered softly as he untied the reins. What kind of person shares their own supper with a stranger who can't pay? The windmill appeared against the darkening sky like a skeleton praying. Daniel followed the wagon rut south as Maria had said. 2 miles of scrubland dotted with creosote and prickly pear. His mare's hooves crunched on dry earth. The evening wind carried the smell of dust and sage. The ranch spread out in a shallow valley, a small adobe house with wooden beams poking through the flat roof. A chicken coop leaning slightly east, a corral with 3 horses drowsing in the last light. And behind it all, a weathered barn with gaps between the planks wide enough to see through. Maria stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching him ride in. An older woman stood beside her, small, sharp-eyed, built like a fence post that had survived 100 winters. Her gray hair was pulled back tight, and her hands were planted on her hips like she was bracing for a fight. Daniel dismounted at the corral fence. His boots hit the ground and sent up a puff of dust. "Tia," Maria said, "this is Daniel, the man I told you about." The old woman's eyes raked over him, his patched shirt, his trail-worn face, his 2 fine boots, her mouth pressed into a line thin as a knife blade. "You touch my niece wrong," she said. "I'll gut you like a fish." "Tia, por favor." Maria's voice carried a note of tired patience. "He's just a man who needs a place to rest." "Tired men do stupid things." Rosa's eyes didn't leave Daniel's face. "I'm watching." Daniel took off his hat, held it against his chest. "Ma'am, I'm grateful for the shelter. I won't cause trouble." Rosa snorted. "That's what they all say." She turned and walked back into the house, screen door banging behind her. Maria sighed. "Don't mind her. She's been like that since my uncle passed. Figures every man's got bad intentions. Maybe she's right to think so." Maria looked at him. Something flickered in her eyes, curiosity. Maybe, or recognition. "Barn's this way," she said. She led him around the side of the house, past the chicken coop where a rooster eyed him with suspicion, past a small vegetable garden where bean poles stood like sentinels in the fading light. The barn doors hung on leather hinges, cracked but functional. Maria pulled one open, and the smell hit him hay and horse and clean dirt. Honest smells. "There's blankets in the corner," she said. "Horse blankets, but they're warm. Wells out back if you need water. Privy's past the mesquite tree." Daniel stepped inside. The barn was small room for maybe 4 horses, though only one stall was occupied by an old gray gelding who barely lifted his head at the intrusion. Hay bales stacked against the far wall. A tin lantern hung from a nail, punched with star patterns that would throw shapes on the walls when lit. "This is more than I expected," he said. "It ain't much. It's dry. It's got a roof." He turned to face her. "It's more than I've had in a week." Maria leaned against the doorframe. The last of the daylight caught the side of her face, turned her skin warm as adobe. "You can stay as long as you need," she said. "But Rosa'll expect you to work for your keep. We ain't running a charity." "I'd be obliged to work. What needs doing?" "Well needs tending. Ropes fraying, buckets got a crack. You handy with tools?" "Handy enough." She nodded. "Tomorrow, then. Get some sleep. You look like you haven't had a full night in days." She pushed off from the doorframe and walked back toward the house. Daniel watched her go the way she moved, unhurried, comfortable in her own skin despite what the world thought of her shape. The screen door opened and closed. A lamp flickered to life in the kitchen window. Daniel spread the horse blankets in the corner, lay down on the hay, and stared at the rafters until the stars came out through the gaps in the roof. Morning came with roosters and the smell of coffee drifting from the house. Daniel found Maria at the well behind the barn, wrestling with a rope that had seen better decades. The wooden bucket sat at her feet, a crack running down one side that someone had tried to patch with pine tar. "Thought I'd get an early start," she said without looking up. "Rope's worse than I remembered." "Let me see." He knelt beside her, took the rope in his hands. The fibers were frayed halfway through another few weeks, and it would snap clean. The bucket wasn't much better, but it would hold water if they reinforced the patch. "You got any extra cordage, tool sheds by the corral. Should be what you need." He found the supplies and spent the next hour splicing new rope into the old, his fingers remembering the work from years of mending fences on his own ranch. Maria sat on an overturned crate and watched, asking questions now and then about the technique. The sun climbed higher. Sweat beaded on his forehead and ran down his temples. He didn't notice until Maria handed him a tin cup of water. "You've done this before," she said. "Grew up doing it." That was true enough. Where? Colorado Territory? Ranch country? He drank the water, handed back the cup. "Long time ago." She didn't push, just sat there, quiet, while he finished the repair. When he lowered the bucket into the well and it came up full without leaking, Maria smiled, a real smile, not the polite kind people gave strangers. "You're better than you look," she said. "I get that a lot." Her laugh caught him off guard, full and loud. Head thrown back, no embarrassment in it. The sound rolled across the yard and seemed to startle the chickens. Daniel realized he was smiling. First time in months, his face remembered how they hauled water together through the morning, bucket after bucket, carrying them to the horse trough, to the kitchen, to the garden. Their hands brushed on the rope more than once. Neither pulled away. "Can I ask you something?" Maria said as they rested in the shade of the mesquite tree. "Depends on what it is." "Where'd you come from? Before the riding and the sleeping in barns?" Daniel picked at a callus on his palm. The silence stretched. "Had a place once," he said finally. "Lost it." "How bad deal?" He looked at her. "Bad marriage. Woman I thought loved me turned out to love what I had more than who I was." Maria's eyes softened, not pity, understanding. "I know something about that," she said quietly. "Being seen for what you are instead of who you are," she told him then. About growing up heavy in a town that worshipped thin. About the boys who called her La Gorda like it was her Christian name. About the mothers who told their sons she'd make a good cook but nothing else. About learning to make herself small inside even when her body refused to cooperate. Daniel listened, really listened, the way he hadn't listened to anyone in years. "They were fools," he said when she finished. "Maybe," she shrugged. "Or maybe they just saw what was easy to see." "Easy ain't the same as true." Maria looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached out and took his hand, turned it over, ran her thumb across the calluses on his palm. "These ain't soft hands," she said. "You've worked, hard work, not pushing paper." His breath caught. She saw him. The real him. The parts that mattered. And she didn't know a single thing about his money. The kitchen window creaked. Daniel glanced up to see Rosa watching them, arms crossed, face unreadable. She didn't smile, but she didn't call Maria inside, either. "I should get back to the diner," Maria said, releasing his hand. "Lunch crowd'll be coming." You need help there. You know how to cook. I know how to wash dishes. That laugh again, warm as sunlight. Tomorrow, she said. Rosa can spare you for a few hours. She walked toward the house to collect her things. Daniel watched her go, his palm still warm where her thumb had traced his calluses. From the window, Rosa's eyes followed him. What would happen when she found out who he really was? 3 weeks settled into a rhythm Daniel hadn't known he was missing. Mornings he worked mending the split-rail fence that ran along the north pasture, hauling water, mucking out the horse stalls. His shoulders ached by noon and his hands cracked at the knuckles. But it was good pain, honest pain. The kind that meant something got done. Afternoons Maria came back from the diner, and they'd sit on the porch while Rosa cooked supper inside. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they just watched the sun drop behind the mountains, the sky turning colors that had no names. On the third morning, Daniel found a section of fence that had rotted through at the base. The rails hung crooked, useless against any cow with half a mind to wander. He pulled the bad posts, dug new holes, set fresh cedar that Rosa had stacked behind the tool shed years ago and never used. The sun beat down on his neck. Sweat soaked through his shirt and dried in salt lines. His arms burned from swinging the post driver. Footsteps in the dry grass behind him. Maria appeared with a tin cup of water and a cloth bundle. She handed him the cup first. He drank it down in 3 long swallows, water running down his chin. Brought you something. She unwrapped the cloth fresh tortillas, still warm, folded around strips of beef and roasted peppers. You didn't have to do that. I know. She sat down on a flat rock nearby, smoothed her skirt over her knees. Eat before it gets cold. He ate. The beef was tender, the peppers smoky sweet, better than anything he'd tasted in the fancy restaurants back in Denver. Where'd you learn to cook like this? My mother. Maria picked at a thread on her sleeve. She died when I was 14, taught me everything she knew before she went. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. She looked out at the pasture, at the mountains beyond. Rosa took me in after. She's tough, but she's fair. Never made me feel like a burden. Daniel set down the empty cloth, wiped his hands on his trousers. You're lucky to have her. I know it. Maria stood, brushed off her skirt. You want to see something? She led him around the side of the barn, past the chicken coop, to a patch of ground he hadn't paid attention to before, a garden small but well tended. Bean poles stood in neat rows, the vines climbing toward the sun. Squash plants sprawled across the dirt, their broad leaves shading yellow flowers. Chili peppers hung in clusters, some still green, others turning red. Maria walked between the rows, checking leaves, pinching off dead growth. This is mine, she said. Rosa lets me have this corner. I sell what we don't eat at the diner. Daniel crouched beside a tomato plant, heavy with fruit. The smell of the leaves sharp, green, alive filled his nose. You've got a gift for this. It's just dirt and water and patience. But she smiled when she said it, pride in her voice, quiet but unmistakable. He knew that feeling. The same way he felt looking out over his own land, the land he'd built from nothing, acre by acre, year by year, before Eleanor, before everything went wrong. My father had a garden, he said. The words came out before he could stop them. Nothing fancy, just vegetables for the table. He used to say you could tell a lot about a man by how he treated growing things. Maria looked at him. What did he mean by that? I think he meant. Daniel paused, searching for the right words. If you're patient enough to wait for a seed to become a plant, you're patient enough for most things that matter. She didn't respond, just looked at him with those coffee-dark eyes, like she was seeing something he hadn't meant to show. That evening, after supper, Maria brought out a book. The cover was worn soft from years of handling. The spine cracked when she opened it. She sat on the porch step, lantern light falling over her shoulder, and began to read. Poetry. Something about mountains and rivers and the passing of seasons. Her voice was low and careful, feeling out each word like stepping stones across a creek. Daniel closed his eyes and listened. He couldn't remember the last time someone had read to him. His mother, maybe, before she died. Before his father sold off half the herd to pay for a doctor who couldn't save her anyway. When Maria finished, the night had gone full dark. Stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt. That was beautiful, he said. My mother's book. She closed it gently. Only thing I have left of hers, besides the recipes. She'd be proud of you. Maria's fingers traced the worn cover. I hope so. Sunday came bright and hot. Maria appeared on the porch in a dress Daniel hadn't seen before, blue calico with a white collar, faded but clean, mended at the elbow with careful stitches. She'd pinned her hair up, a few dark strands escaping to frame her face. Church day, Rosa announced from the doorway. You coming or not? Daniel looked down at his patched shirt, his dusty trousers. I ain't exactly dressed for. God don't care what you're wearing, Rosa cut in. He cares whether you show up. Let's go. The church sat at the edge of town, whitewashed adobe with a hand-carved wooden cross above the door. Wagons lined the yard. Families in their Sunday best filed through the entrance. The women in bonnets and bustles, the men in clean shirts and polished boots. Daniel felt every eye turn toward them as they walked up the path. Whispers followed like flies. Is that the Lopez girl? Who's that with her? Look at his clothes. Must be a drifter she picked up. Maria walked with her head high. Not defiant, just steady. Like she'd learned long ago that looking down only made it worse. They found seats near the back. The pew was hard. The hymnal worn. Daniel's knee pressed against Maria's through the fabric of her skirt. The preacher spoke about charity. About loving thy neighbor. Daniel watched the congregation nod along, the same congregation that whispered and pointed not 10 minutes before. Halfway through the sermon, a woman in a silk dress leaned toward her companion in the pew ahead. Her voice carried, meant to be heard. Look at her. Fat as a sow and twice as desperate, bringing in strays like they're going to marry her. The companion tittered behind a gloved hand, Daniel's fists clenched on his thighs. The blood rushed hot to his face. He started to rise. Maria's hand found his wrist. Her fingers pressed gently against his pulse. Let it go, she murmured, so soft only he could hear. Words only cut if you hand them the knife. He looked at her. Her jaw was tight, but her eyes were calm, sad, maybe, but not broken. He sat back down, unclenched his fists. But he memorized the woman's face, the silk dress, the pearl earrings, the smug satisfaction in her eyes. After the service, they walked back to the wagon in silence. Rosa climbed up to the driver's seat. Maria moved to follow. Daniel caught her arm. "How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you just let it go?" Maria looked at him. The sunlight caught the lines around her eyes, the ones from smiling and squinting and years of hard living. "Because if I let every cruel word stick, I'd be nothing but wounds by now." She touched his hand, briefly. "Some things ain't worth bleeding over." She climbed into the wagon. Daniel stood there in the churchyard, watching the dust settle behind them. He thought about the woman in silk, about the shopkeeper's daughter, about the widow in Dusty Creek and every other person who'd looked at clothes and boots and decided what a person was worth. Maria had done the opposite. She'd looked at him dirty, poor, with nothing to offer, and seen someone worth feeding, worth sheltering, worth sitting beside in church. What would she see when she learned the truth? The morning started quiet. Maria stood at the stove, humming something low and tuneless while she fried eggs in the cast-iron skillet. The kitchen smelled of coffee and rendered bacon fat. Sunlight slanted through the window, catching the steam rising from the pot. Daniel sat at the table, watching her move. The way she reached for the salt without looking. The way she flipped the eggs with a flick of her wrist, easy as breathing. The way she hummed that formless tune like she'd forgotten anyone else was in the room. Something loosened in his chest, something that had been wound tight for years. Rosa shuffled in from the back room, rosary beads clicking between her fingers. She poured herself coffee, sat down across from Daniel, and fixed him with those sharp old eyes. "You fixing to stay much longer?" "Tia," Maria started. "Hush, I'm asking him, not you." Rosa's gaze didn't waver. "Well," Daniel wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. The tin was warm against his palms. "Long as you'll have me, ma'am, I can keep working for my keep." Rosa snorted. "Work's fine, but a man ought to know where he's headed. Drifting ain't living." "I know it." "Do you?" She took a long sip of coffee, set the cup down hard. "Because from where I'm sitting, you look like a man running from something, and I won't have trouble brought to my door." The words hit closer than she knew. Daniel opened his mouth to respond, hoofbeats coming fast from the north road. Rosa's head turned toward the window. Maria set down her spatula. Daniel pushed back from the table and crossed to the door. 3 riders came up the wagon track, trail dust coating their long dusters. The lead man sat tall in the saddle lean, weathered, with eyes that reminded Daniel of a coyote sizing up a henhouse. A gun belt hung low on his hips, the holster worn smooth from use. The other 2 flanked him like shadows. Younger, harder. The kind of men who did what they were told without asking questions. Daniel stepped onto the porch. Maria appeared at his shoulder. Rosa stayed in the doorway, one hand resting on the frame, and Daniel noticed the kitchen knife she'd slipped into her apron pocket. The lead rider reined up at the corral fence. He didn't dismount. "Morning?" His voice was flat, carrying no warmth. "Name's Jennings. Looking for someone." "Ain't we all?" Rosa said from the doorway. Jennings's eyes flicked to her, dismissed her, moved to Daniel. "We're looking for a man, rich rancher from up Colorado way. Word is he's wandering the territory dressed like a beggar." A thin smile crossed his face. "Fool's errand, if you ask me. But someone's paying good money for information." Daniel kept his face still. His heart hammered against his ribs. "What's this rancher's name?" Maria asked. "Carter. Daniel Carter." Jennings watched Daniel's face as he said it. owns the rocking sea up near Fort Collins. 2,000 acres, 800 head, man's worth a fortune. But apparently he's got some screws loose. Wife's family wants him found. Ex-wife, Daniel thought. Eleanor, her people, contesting the divorce settlement, trying to claim he'd abandoned his property so they could take it. Never heard of him, Daniel said. His voice came out steady, surprised him. Jennings tilted his head. That's so. I'm just a ranch hand. Don't know nothing about rich men from Colorado. One of the younger men nudged his horse forward. We should search the barn. Now hold on. Maria stepped in front of Daniel, moving toward the porch steps. Ain't nothing in that barn but hay and a tired horse. You got no right to go searching people's property. Jennings's eyes narrowed. Ma'am, I'm just doing a job. Don't mean to cause trouble. Then don't cause any. Maria planted herself at the top of the steps, arms crossed. This man's been working my land near 3 weeks. He ain't got nothing but his back and his hands. 3 weeks? Jennings turned that coyote gaze back to Daniel. Where were you before that? Miller's Crossing. Before that, Dusty Creek. Anyone there who can vouch for you? Daniel thought of the shopkeeper's daughter who wouldn't sell him a ribbon, the widow who called him a drifter, the mother who yanked her child away. Nobody who'd bother, he said. Rosa pushed past them, stepping off the porch with her chin jutted out. She stopped 3 feet from Jennings's horse and spat on the ground. I don't talk to men who ain't got the manners to take off their hats in front of a lady's home. Jennings stared at her. Then, slowly, he reached up and removed his hat. His hair was thinning on top, slicked down with sweat. Something flickered across his face, not quite respect, but close. The look of a man who recognized stubborn when he saw it. Better, Rosa said. Now state your business and get off my property. Just asking questions, ma'am. You asked? We answered? Man's a drifter. Came looking for work. We gave him some. That's the whole story. Rosa's eyes glittered like flint. Unless you're calling my niece a liar. Jennings held up a hand. No offense meant. His gaze drifted past Rosa, past Maria, and landed on Daniel's feet. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. His boots. Those hand-tooled leather boots he'd been too careless to swap out. The ones that cost more than most ranch hands made in 3 months. Jennings saw them. His eyes traveled back up the patched shirt, the calloused hands, the sun-weathered face, and settled on Daniel's eyes. Those ain't no poor man's boots, friend. The silence stretched tight as wire. They were my father's, Daniel said. The lie came quick, desperate. Only thing I got left of him. That's so. Jennings's tone said he didn't believe a word. Your father must have been doing well for himself. He was, before he lost everything. He seems to run in the family. One of the younger men swung down from his horse, boots hitting the dirt. He started toward the barn. Maria moved. Fast. She put herself between the man and the barn door, her body blocking the entrance. I said no searching. Lady, step aside. This is my aunt's property. You got no warrant, no authority. You want to search, you bring a marshal. Her voice didn't waver. Until then, you ride on. The man looked to Jennings. Jennings sat quiet for a long moment. His eyes moved between Maria and Daniel, calculating. His hand rested on his saddle horn. Fingers tapping a slow rhythm, the gesture of a man thinking harder than he wanted to let on. Then he reached out and grabbed Maria's arm. Don't make this harder than... Daniel moved before the thought finished forming. He was off the porch and across the yard in 3 strides. His hand closed around Jennings's wrist, gripping hard enough to feel the bones shift. "Get your hand off her." His voice came out flat, cold. The voice he'd used in boardrooms and negotiations, and the courtroom where he'd finally cut Eleanor loose. Now, Jennings looked at him. Something passed between them. Recognition? Maybe. The lead writer's eyes widened slightly. He saw it. The posture that wasn't a drifter's posture. The authority that years of wealth had stamped into bone and muscle. The look of a man who gave orders, not took them. "This ain't no beggar." Jennings released Maria's arm. Daniel let go of his wrist. The silence hung thick as smoke. "We'll be back," Jennings said quietly. He put his hat back on. "You might want to think about what you're hiding, friend, and whether it's worth the trouble it's going to bring." He wheeled his horse around. The other two fell in behind him. They rode out the way they came, dust rising in their wake. Daniel watched until they disappeared over the ridge. Maria rubbed her arm where Jennings had grabbed her. Rosa stood rigid as a post, the kitchen knife still in her apron pocket. Nobody spoke. The chickens scratched in the yard. The old gray gelding snorted in the barn. Somewhere far off, a hawk screamed. Daniel looked at Maria, at the red marks forming on her arm, at the fear she was trying to hide behind that steady face. He'd brought this to her door. His lie, his test, his fool's errand. And now she was in danger because of it. "Daniel." Maria's voice was soft. "Careful. Who are you really?" He opened his mouth. The truth sat on his tongue like a coal. The sound of hooves reached them again, faint. From the south this time. The hoofbeats from the south turned out to be nothing a neighbor's horse that had broken loose from its corral. Rosa caught it, tied it to the fence post, sent word to the owner. But the damage was done. Maria didn't ask her question again. She went inside, helped Rosa with supper, said nothing more than necessary. The silence between them pressed down like a hand on Daniel's chest. He sat on the porch as the sun dropped. His hands hung between his knees. The red marks on Maria's arm, he couldn't stop seeing them. Couldn't stop knowing he'd put them there. Not with his own hands, but close enough. He'd come out here to test people, to find out who would stand by a man with nothing. He hadn't thought about what his test might cost someone else. The screen door creaked. Rosa stepped out, arms folded, and stood over him like a judge about to pass sentence. "You ain't what you say you are." It wasn't a question. Daniel looked at his boots. Those fine leather boots that had given him away. "No, ma'am. You gonna tell me who you really are?" "I'm gonna tell Maria first. She deserves that much." Rosa studied him for a long moment. Her eyes were hard, but something else moved behind them. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe the shadow of understanding. "You hurt that girl," she said quietly. "And I'll make what Jennings threatened look like a church social. You hear me?" "Yes, ma'am." She went back inside. The screen door banged shut. Supper was quiet. Beans and cornbread, same as always. But the food sat in Daniel's stomach like stones. Maria ate with her eyes on her plate. Rosa watched them both, saying nothing. When the dishes were cleared, Daniel stood. "Maria, can we talk outside?" She looked at him. Her face was unreadable. "All right." They walked to the well. The moon hung low over the mountains, silver light spilling across the desert. The air had cooled, Carrying the smell of sage and the distant sweetness of the garden, Daniel's boots crunched on dry earth. His throat felt like sandpaper. Maria. He stopped at the well's edge. The bucket hung motionless on its new rope. I ain't been straight with you. She stood an arm's length away, arms wrapped around herself against the evening chill. I know. You know. I know you're hiding something. Her voice was calm. Tired. Maybe. I've known since the first day. A man don't just wander into a crossroads diner with nothing but the clothes on his back unless he's running from something. Daniel's chest tightened. Why didn't you say anything? Because it wasn't my business. She looked at the moon, not at him. We all got pasts, things we'd rather leave behind. I figured you'd tell me when you were ready, or you wouldn't. Either way. The words he'd rehearsed in his head, the explanation, the justification, they all crumbled to dust. What was he supposed to say? I'm rich. Maria, I own 2,000 acres and 800 head of cattle. I came out here to test people, to see who would be kind to a man with nothing. And you were kind. You were the only one. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Maria turned to face him. The moonlight caught the curve of her cheek, the soft lines around her eyes. Can I tell you something instead? She said. He nodded. She leaned against the well's stone rim. Her fingers traced the cracks in the mortar. When I was 19, there was a man, Tomas. His father owned the mercantile in town. She paused, collecting the words. He was handsome, educated. Every girl in the county wanted him. Daniel waited. He started paying attention to me, coming to the diner, ordering coffee, staying to talk. I couldn't believe it. Mila Gorda, the fat girl nobody wanted. Her voice went flat. I should have known better. What happened? He proposed. The word came out bitter. Right there in the town square. In front of everyone, got down on one knee, took out a ring, asked me to marry him. Daniel's hands curled into fists at his sides. I said yes, of course I said yes. I was crying. I was so happy. The whole square was watching. I thought I finally thought. Someone saw me. The real me. She stopped, swallowed hard. Then what? Then his friends started laughing. Her jaw tightened. Tomas looked at them, looked back at me, and he laughed too. Said he couldn't believe I actually fell for it. Said no man in his right mind would marry a cow like me. The words hit Daniel like a fist to the gut. He took the ring back, walked away, left me standing there in front of the whole town with tears running down my face and everyone laughing. She looked at him. Her eyes were dry, but something raw moved behind them, old pain. Scarred over but not healed. I didn't leave the house for 3 months after that. Couldn't stand the looks, the whispers, the pity that was worse than the cruelty. She straightened up, pulling her shawl tighter. So when I say I know what it's like to be seen for what you are, instead of who you are, I mean it. Daniel couldn't speak. His throat had closed up entirely. He thought of his own test, his clever plan to see who would be kind to a poor man. He'd worn poverty like a costume, something he could take off whenever he wanted. Maria had never been able to take anything off. His face burned, his stomach turned. He looked at his hands, the hands that had treated her kindness like a thing to be measured, and couldn't stand the sight of them. He was no better than Tomas. Different lie, same cruelty. Maria. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. Her voice sharpened. I'm telling you because I want you to understand something. What's that? I don't care what you were, Daniel. She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the soap she'd used, the faint trace of wood smoke in her hair. I don't care where you came from or what you're hiding. I know who you are now. I've watched you work. I've watched you treat Rosa with respect, even when she was mean as a snake. I've watched you tip your hat to a little girl whose mother called you a beggar. Her hand found his. Her fingers were calloused, rough from years of work. That's the man I know. Whatever else there is, it don't change that. Daniel looked down at their joined hands. His eyes stung. His chest ached. He didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve her. I have to tell you. Not tonight. She squeezed his fingers gently. You'll tell me when you're ready, or you won't. But right now I'm tired. And you're tired. And those men might come back tomorrow. Whatever it is can wait till morning. She released his hand, turned toward the house. Maria, she stopped. You're wrong about one thing. What's that? You said no man in his right mind would want you. His voice came out rough, scraped raw. Tomas was a fool. Any man who can't see what's right in front of him don't deserve to call himself a man. She stood very still. The moonlight silvered her hair. Then she walked back to the house without another word. Daniel watched her go. The screen door opened and closed. He stayed by the well for a long time, staring at the sky. The stars wheeled overhead. Coyotes called in the distance. He'd made up his mind. Tomorrow. First light. He'd tell her everything: the ranch, the money, the test. He'd lay it all out and let her decide what to do with it. And if she walked away, he'd deserve that too. He returned to the barn, lay down on the hay, stared at the rafters until his eyes burned. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Maria's face in the moonlight. Heard her voice saying those words, I know who you are. But she didn't. Not really. She knew the man in the patched shirt, the man who fixed fences and hauled water and sat beside her in church. She didn't know Daniel Carter of the rocking sea, the man who'd treated human kindness like a science experiment. The first gray light of dawn crept through the gaps in the barn walls. Daniel sat up, rubbed his face with both hands. Today. He pushed open the barn door and froze. 4 riders sat at the edge of the property. Jennings in front, 3 men behind him, and the 4th man wore a city suit and a bowler hat. And he was holding a sheaf of legal papers. The lawyer dismounted first. He was a soft man, round belly pushing against his vest, pale hands that had never held anything heavier than a pen. His bowler hat sat crooked on his head, and sweat already darkened the collar of his city shirt, despite the morning cool. Mr. Carter? He pulled a sheaf of papers from his satchel. Red wax seals, fancy letterhead. I'm Edmund Whitmore, representing the Hargrove family of Boston. I have here a summons requiring your presence at the Territorial Court in Denver to address claims of property abandonment and I know who you represent. Daniel's voice came out flat. He stood in the barn doorway, hay still clinging to his patched shirt, looking nothing like a man worth 2,000 acres. Jennings sat his horse with that coyote smile, but something flickered in his eyes, a hesitation that hadn't been there yesterday. His fingers tapped against his saddle horn, the gesture of a man thinking harder than he wanted to let on. The other 2 riders flanked him, the same hard-eyed men from before, hands resting easy near their holsters. So you admit it? Whitmore's voice climbed with excitement. You are Daniel James Carter, owner of the Rocking Sea Ranch in Colorado Territory. The screen door banged open. Maria came down the porch steps fast, Rosa right behind her. Maria's hair was loose, uncombed. She'd thrown a shawl over her nightdress. Her feet were bare in the dirt. What's going on here? Whitmore turned, dismissive. Ma'am, this is a legal matter. Please step aside. This is my aunt's property. I ain't stepping anywhere. She moved past Whitmore, past Jennings's horse, and planted herself in front of Daniel. Her back was to him. Her shoulders were set hard. You want him, she said. You go through me first. Jennings shifted in his saddle. His eyes moved to Maria's bare feet, to her sleep-tangled hair, to the way she stood like she'd fight all four of them, with nothing but her fists. That hesitation deepened into something else, something almost like respect. Ma'am, he said, his voice quieter than before. You don't know what you're protecting. This man's been lying to you from the start. I know exactly what I'm protecting. Maria's voice didn't waver. A man who fixed our fence. A man who hauled our water. A man who sat beside me in church when everyone else was whispering. She turned her head slightly, not quite looking at Daniel. Whatever else he is, that's who I know. Daniel's chest tightened. His breath caught somewhere behind his ribs. He stepped forward, put his hand on Maria's shoulder, felt her tense beneath his touch. Maria. His voice came out rough. Let me handle this. Daniel. Please. She looked at him then. Really looked. Her eyes searched his face. And he watched her see something she'd known all along. The bearing he couldn't quite hide. The authority that years of wealth had stamped into his bones. I knew, she said softly. She said, not the particulars, but I knew you was more than you let on. He guided her aside. Gently, she let him. Then he turned to face the riders. His shoulders went back. His chin came up. The slouch of the drifter fell away like a shed skin. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of boardrooms and negotiations and a courtroom where he'd cut Eleanor loose, despite everything her family had thrown at him. I'm Daniel James Carter, owner of the Rocking Sea Ranch, 2,000 acres, 800 head of cattle, and a house that's been in my family for 3 generations. Whitmore's mouth fell open. Jennings went still. The Hargroves' claims are lies, and we both know it. Daniel's eyes fixed on Whitmore. I didn't abandon my property. I left it in the care of my foreman while I traveled, which I have every legal right to do. The divorce was finalized 6 months ago. Eleanor signed the papers herself. Whitmore fumbled with his documents, shuffling through them with trembling fingers. The Hargrove family contends that your erratic behavior demonstrates mental instability. Wandering the territory in vagrant attire, refusing to... A man can wear what he likes on his own time. Be that as it may, the court will examine nothing. Daniel took a step forward. Whitmore took a step back. Because if your clients want to argue mental fitness, I'll be happy to present the letters Eleanor wrote to her lover while we were still married. The ones dated March through July of last year. The ones detailing exactly how she planned to spend my money once I was out of the picture. The color drained from Whitmore's face. I have names, Daniel continued, his voice dropping low and cold. Dates. Details that would make very interesting reading in a Boston courtroom or a Boston newspaper. Whitmore's hands shook. The papers rustled like dry leaves. Mr. Carter, perhaps we could discuss a settlement. There's nothing to discuss. You ride back to Boston and tell Eleanor's father that if he wants a fight, I'll give him one. But he'd better be ready to lose more than money. Jennings sat quiet through the exchange. His eyes moved between Daniel and Whitmore, calculating. His fingers had stopped tapping against the saddle horn. Mr. Whitmore! His voice cut through the tension. Maybe we should discuss this privately. There's nothing to discuss. Whitmore stuffed the papers back into his satchel with clumsy haste. Mr. Carter, this isn't over. The Hargroves have resources. So do I. Daniel's voice went quiet. Dangerous. And unlike your clients, I earned mine. Whitmore scrambled onto his horse with the graceless flailing of a man who rarely rode. His face had gone the color of old cheese. He kicked his mount into motion before he'd even settled into the saddle, heading back down the wagon track at a trot that would bruise him for days. The two younger riders exchanged glances. Without a word, they wheeled their horses and followed the lawyer. Jennings didn't move. He sat there, studying Daniel with those coyote eyes. The morning sun threw long shadows across the yard. Somewhere in the chicken coop, a rooster crowed. You fooled me, Jennings said finally. I'll give you that. Wasn't trying to fool you. I was trying to fool myself. Something shifted in Jennings's face. The hard lines around his mouth softened slightly. My father was a rancher, he said quietly. Lost everything in the drought of '71. Spent the rest of his life working other men's land, wearing other men's clothes. He looked at Daniel's patched shirt, his calloused hands. I know what it looks like when a man's trying to remember who he was before the money. Daniel said nothing. Jennings gathered his reins. We won't be back. He glanced toward the trail where Whitmore had disappeared, then back at Daniel. Whatever the Hargroves are paying, it ain't worth crossing a man who knows how to fight. I've seen enough of those to know. He touched the brim of his hat. A gesture that might have been respect, might have been farewell, and turned his horse. Daniel watched him ride until he disappeared over the ridge. The dust settled. The chickens resumed their scratching. Somewhere in the barn, the old gray gelding snorted. Rosa stood on the porch, wooden spoon clutched in one hand like a weapon. Her mouth hung open. For the first time since Daniel had met her, she had nothing to say. Maria stood where he'd left her, arms wrapped around herself, bare feet in the dirt. Daniel turned to face her. I should have told you from the start. His voice cracked on the words. I was scared. Scared you'd see me different. Scared you'd look at me the way everyone else did when they found out I had money. Maria didn't move. I came out here to test people. To find out who would be kind to a man with nothing. His throat burned. It was stupid. It was cruel. I treated you like a specimen. Something to be measured. Still, she said nothing. You gave me food when I couldn't pay. You gave me shelter when I had nowhere else to go. You stood in front of those men to protect me, even though you didn't know. His voice broke. He stopped, swallowed hard. Even though I didn't know you was rich. Maria's voice was quiet, level. Yes. She walked toward him, slow, deliberate. Her bare feet made no sound on the packed earth. She stopped an arm's length away. You think that changes anything I don't know? The words scraped out raw. I hope not. But I wouldn't blame you if... Daniel. She reached up and put her hand on his cheek. Her palm was warm, rough with calluses. I told you last night, I know who you are, not what you own, not what you were, who you are. I lied to you. You hid something. There's a difference. Her thumb traced the line of his jaw. A liar would have run. A liar wouldn't be standing here with his heart on his sleeve, waiting for me to decide if he's worth forgiving. Daniel's eyes stung. He couldn't speak. I see you the same as I always did. Maria's voice was steady. Sure. A man who needed a place to rest. A man who worked for his keep. A man who tipped his hat to a little girl when her mama called him a beggar. She smiled, small and sad. That's the man I know. The money's just noise. He pulled her close, wrapped his arms around her and held on like she was the only solid thing in a world that had gone liquid. She held him back. From the porch, Rosa's voice cut through the morning air. You two gonna stand there all day? Or you gonna come eat breakfast? Eggs are getting cold. Maria laughed against his chest. A wet sound, half sob, half joy. Daniel pulled back, looked at her face. Tear tracks on her cheeks, but her eyes were clear. There's more, he said. Things I need to tell you, about the ranch, about Eleanor, about everything. I know. She took his hand. But Rosa's right. Eggs first, truth after. She led him toward the house. But before they reached the porch, he stopped. Maria? What? When this is settled, when Eleanor's family backs off and the lawyers are gone, I want you to see it. The rocking sea, my home. He squeezed her hand. Our home, if you'll have it. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled. One thing at a time. Daniel Carter. She tugged him toward the door. Let's start with breakfast. Breakfast stretched into mid-morning. Daniel talked. The words came slow at first, dragged out like splinters from old wood. Eleanor. The courtship that had felt like a fairy tale. The wedding in her father's Boston mansion. All white flowers and imported champagne. The first year of marriage, when he'd believed himself the luckiest man alive. Then the cracks. The late nights she spent in town. The letters she hid. The way she flinched when he touched her. I found out on a Tuesday, he said. His coffee had gone cold in his hands. Came home early from a cattle drive. Heard voices upstairs. Maria sat across from him, hands folded on the table. Rosa stood at the stove, pretending to clean a skillet that was already clean. I didn't confront them. Couldn't. Daniel stared at the wood grain of the table. Just stood in the parlor, listening to them laugh. Then I walked out. Slept in the barn that night. And the next. And the next. What happened to the man? Rosa's voice was sharp. He left town, smart enough to know I could ruin him if I wanted. Daniel's jaw tightened. Eleanor tried to explain, said she was lonely, said I was always working, always gone, like that justified it. It don't, Maria said quietly. No, it don't. He looked up at her. The divorce took 6 months. Her family fought it every step. Claimed I was unstable, unfit, abandoning my responsibilities. They wanted the land, the cattle, everything my father built. But you won. I won the legal fight. He set down the cold coffee, Lost everything else. My faith in people. My belief that anyone could love me for who I was instead of what I had. He paused. That's why I came out here, dressed like a beggar, wandering from town to town. I wanted to know, needed to know if kindness still existed, or if everyone just wanted what they could get from me. Rosa turned from the stove. Her eyes were hard, but something else moved behind them. And what did you find? Daniel looked at Maria. I found her. The kitchen went silent. Sunlight slanted through the window, catching dust motes in the air. The old clock on the shelf ticked steady and slow. Maria's hands unfolded on the table. She reached across and took his fingers in hers. You should have told me sooner. I know. I would have understood. I know that too. His thumb traced the calluses on her palm. I was scared. Scared that if you knew the truth, everything would change. You'd look at me different. Treat me different. The way everyone else did once they found out I had money. And now I know I was a fool. He lifted her hand, pressed his lips to her knuckles. You're the only person who ever saw me, the real me, not the money or the land or the fancy house, just a tired man who needed a place to rest. Rosa snorted from the stove. You two are gonna make me cry, and I ain't cried since my husband died. Stop it. Maria laughed. A wet sound, thick with emotion. Daniel released her hand and stood on it. I'm not asking you to marry me. The words came out steady, certain. That would be rushing. You deserve better than a proposal from a man who's been lying to you for weeks. Maria's brow furrowed. Then what are you asking? Permission. He moved around the table, knelt beside her chair, not on one knee, not like Tomas in the town square with his cruel joke, just kneeling, like a man at prayer. Permission to court you proper, to come calling like a gentleman, to bring you flowers and sit on the porch with your aunt watching through the window, to do things right, the way you deserve. Maria stared at him. You're asking to court me, if you'll have me. Daniel Carter. Her voice wavered. You own 2,000 acres and 800 head of cattle. You could have any woman in Colorado territory. Why would you want? Because none of them fed me when I was hungry. His voice cut across hers. None of them offered me shelter when I had nowhere else to go. None of them stood in front of armed men to protect me when they thought I was worthless. He took her hands again. You saw me at my lowest, Maria, and you were kind anyway. That's worth more than all the land in the world. Rosa's rosary beads clicked softly in the silence. Maria looked at her aunt. Rosa looked back, face unreadable. Well? Maria asked. Rosa considered for a long moment. Then she pointed her wooden spoon at Daniel. You hurt her, and I'll find you. Don't matter how big your ranch is. Don't matter how many cattle you own. I'll find you. And I'll make you wish those Hargroves had gotten to you first. She paused. Now get out of my kitchen. You're in the way. Daniel rose to his feet. Maria was smiling. Tears ran down her cheeks, but she was smiling. Yes, she said. Daniel rode north the following week to settle affairs with Silas and prepare for the Hargroves' legal challenge. The lawyers in Denver assured him the case was weak. Abandonment claims didn't hold, when a foreman could testify the owner had left clear instructions and returned within 2 months. The Hargroves could fight if they wanted, but they'd lose. A month later, with the worst of the paperwork behind him. Daniel returned to Rosa's ranch. He came with a wagon. The buckboard was polished walnut. The seats upholstered in good leather. A team of matched bays pulled it strong, well-fed animals with glossy coats and patient eyes. Daniel sat on the driver's bench in clean clothes, his beard trimmed, his boots polished. Maria stood on the porch, one hand pressed to her mouth. "You look different," she said. "I am different." He climbed down, walked to her, took her hands. Rested, fed, ready to show you something. Rosa emerged from the house with a carpet bag in each hand. She'd put on her best dress, black silk, 20 years old, but well preserved. "We staying long as you like." Daniel took the bags, loaded them into the wagon bed. The rocking seat has plenty of room. The drive north took over a week. They stopped at roadside inns, ate in small-town diners, watched the landscape change from scrubland to grassland to the rolling foothills of the Colorado mountains. Daniel told stories about the land where his father had built the first fence, where the creek flooded in '68, where he'd shot his first deer at 14 years old. Maria listened. Rosa dozed in the back, wrapped in a wool blanket. On the 9th day, they crested a ridge, and the valley spread out below them. 2,000 acres of green and gold. Cattle dotted the pastures like seeds scattered from a giant's hand. A creek wound through the center, flashing silver in the sunlight. And at the heart of it all, a house. Not just a house, a home. 2 stories, built of local stone and timber. A wraparound porch with rocking chairs, wind chimes hanging from the eaves, a barn twice the size of Rosa's entire property, corrals, outbuildings, a bunkhouse for the hands. Maria didn't speak. Daniel guided the wagon down the slope, through the main gate with its iron arch rocking C branded in the metal, and up the long drive to the house. Silas waited on the porch. His weathered face split into a grin when he saw Daniel. "About time you came back." He walked down the steps and caught Daniel's hand in a rough shake. "Place ain't been the same without you." "Silas, this is Maria Lopez, and her aunt, Rosa." Silas touched his hat brim. Ma'am? Rosa climbed down from the wagon, carpet bag clutched to her chest. Her eyes swept over the house, the land, the cattle in the distance. Her mouth pressed into a thin line. "Big," she said finally. "Too big for one man." "That's why I brought company." Daniel helped Maria down from the bench. Her hands trembled in his. "Come inside. I want to show you something." He led them up the porch steps, through the front door, into a parlor that smelled of beeswax and cedar. The furniture was solid, well made, chosen for comfort rather than show. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. Windows looked out over the valley. Maria turned in a slow circle. Her eyes moved from the oil paintings on the walls, to the books on the shelves, to the worn rug before the hearth. "This is yours. This was my father's, then mine." Daniel took her hand. "And now if you wanted ours." She looked at him. Her eyes were bright, wet. "House ain't nothing without you in it." He squeezed her fingers. "That's the truth of it." Rosa's rosary beads clicked. She stood in the doorway, watching them. "Well," she said, "at least the kitchen's got a proper stove." Maria laughed. The sound filled the room, warm and full and alive. Daniel pulled something from his vest pocket. The gold pocket watch Silas had kept it safe. Brought it back when Daniel asked. The engraving still read, "To my beloved husband," but he'd taken it to a jeweler in Denver and had something added below. He opened the case and showed it to Maria. New words, freshly cut, and to the woman who taught me what love means. Maria's hand covered her mouth. I ain't asking you to marry me yet, Daniel said. But when I do, and I will, I want you to know I've been planning it for a while. She threw her arms around him, buried her face in his chest. Her shoulders shook with sobs. But she was laughing too. Rosa watched from the doorway. Arms folded, face set. Then, slowly, she smiled. That evening they sat on the porch, watching the sun drop behind the mountains. The sky turned gold, then orange, then purple. Cattle lowed in the pastures. Wind chimes sang in the breeze. Maria leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder. Her hand found his in the growing dark. You know, she said. I still ain't used to this. To what? Being here, being wanted. She lifted her head, looked at him. I keep waiting to wake up. To find out it was all a dream. Daniel turned to face her, cupped her cheek in his hand. It ain't a dream. He kissed her forehead. And you're going to have a long time to get used to it. Inside the house, Rosa moved through the rooms with a candle, exploring. Her voice drifted through the open window. Too many rooms. We'll never use half of them. Maria smiled. We might, she said. Someday. The stars came out, one by one. The wind chimes sang. The land stretched out around them, vast and quiet, and full of promise. Home. There's a quiet weight that settles after a story like this one. Something tender in the chest. Familiar in a way that doesn't need explaining. Many of us have known what it feels like to be looked at and found wanting, to carry kindness in our hands and wonder if anyone sees it. Some of us have loved without recognition, given without return, stood firm when the world whispered that we weren't enough. And perhaps you've also known what it means to finally be seen. Not for what you have or what you lack, but for who you are in the stillness of an ordinary moment. It's all right if something in this story stirred old memories. It's okay if it touched places you thought had healed over long ago. These feelings don't need to be resolved or understood. They're allowed to simply rest, like dust settling after a long journey. Some connections are too deep for words. Some kindnesses outlast everything else. They just are. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for letting these words find their way to you.